Hello and good morning. Welcome to another installment of Profiles in Tacticalness. So today we will be talking about the Swordmaster, everyone's favorite guy or lady with a sword here. So this is a class that has kind of steadily seen an improvement throughout the series, and yeah, I mean, let's go ahead and dive right into this. So, first of all, let's go ahead and start with March of the Black Queen. You might say, first of all, hey, but wait a second, there was no Swordmaster in March of the Black Queen. Yes, technically speaking, there was not a Swordmaster in March of the Black Queen. However, there was the Samurai and Samurai Master, which later became the Swordmaster. So their whole shtick was in the front row. They got a couple of attacks to start off with. Once they gained Master rank, they got up that to 3, and then from the back row, they had a Sonic Wave attack, which was basically just a sword beam, more or less. Now, the strange thing was, the sword beam essentially caused recoil damage whenever they used it. So in many cases, they actually got written off almost immediately, since for all intents and purposes they were a pretty average frontline attacker, and from the back row they ended up hitting themselves almost as hard as they ended up hitting somebody else. So it was a little bit of an iffy situation. However, the Sonic move ended up actually scaling up pretty well. So over the course of the game, it ended up getting pretty decently strong, and interestingly enough, it seemed to do some type of bonus damage against larger units, specifically units like dragons and golems and such. It's unclear why, but I believe it was something to do with intelligence scaling. Either way, they could potentially become useful. You saw many throughout the game, and just the fact that they ended up hitting themselves with recoil oftentimes ended up making them a little bit of a throwaway as far as enemies are concerned. So, right, moving on to the next game then, OB64. This is when they were first technically introduced as the Swordmaster. Actually, for all intents and purposes, even though they are later described as only using katanas, the Swordmaster actually only used a claymore in this version. He had to have a claymore in order to even be promoted into this class. And again, very similar to the samurai from the previous game. Essentially, melee attack in the front row, wave attack in the back row, and overall pretty decent class. Moving on to Let Us Cling Together on the SNES here, that's when things started getting a little different. See, suddenly they were given casting abilities, which obviously before they had that Sonic Wave attack, it's arguable whether that counts. But this might be the Swordmaster that a lot of people end up remembering because essentially they didn't use their sword very often. They were a guy that was very freakishly accurate with petrification. This is especially true for Habarim, who actually came with Petrifying Cloud as one of his abilities. And yes, it could essentially hit a 9-tile area, I believe it was, essentially turn an entire enemy party to stone, leaving you to just kind of do whatever you will for the rest of the fight. In many cases, especially for Palace of the Dead, you could essentially run up, use their speed to essentially go and just turn an entire party to rock, and that's it. That's the entire fight. The original version of the Palace of the Dead, if you're unaware, essentially had just a small stack of units, roughly 5 to 8 units, depending on what floor you were on. Sometimes there were bosses that were immune to debuffs, but by and large, it was just clumps of generic enemies. And due to the fact that the range was pretty close, a lot of times the strategy for Palace of the Dead simply revolved around having Habarim run up, turn everybody to stone, and then just laugh, because it's basically 100 floors of that. So, a little bit of a joke at that point, but either way, uh, a strange frontline caster, as it were. They weren't exactly terribly good as far as defense goes. They didn't really have any special abilities as of yet, but they were fairly evasive. They were fairly good at casting for whatever reason. Pretty decent all-around class. They start expanding a little bit more once we get over to Knight of Lodis. So Knight of Lodis, they got a few abilities. First of all, they were, for all intents and purposes, a flat upgrade to the Ninja, in that they got a built-in ranged ability. For Knight of Lodis, not everybody actually got ranged abilities. So the Ninja and the Swordmaster were pretty notable for actually having something they could do if they couldn't get into range. On top of that they still got access to a lot of support abilities. They took away the some of those crazier ones, but they still got access to moves like stun, so they still could cast a pretty decent amount of time. They still had the ability. Well, they now suddenly had the ability to hit pretty decently hard with their sword. Before they were good. Now it was really notable. On top of that, they actually got a special move with a katana, which allowed them to go and get a paralysis off with a sword. It was essentially kind of like a diet kill move in many ways, since there were only 3 kill moves available in all of Night of Lodis. So if you didn't want to go and spend the education for Atropos on a guy, you could essentially just have them use Swallow's Days instead. So katanas started to fall off around endgame in that game, since again they had only one tier, as it were. They were specifically a mid-tier weapon. They were very strong early on. They were okay mid-game, and then by endgame they were just overshadowed by a lot of crazy weapons they started getting. So usually by that point you would switch them over to something like a Snapdragon. They still got a damage bonus from specializing in swords, and yeah, they were just pretty excellent all around. Arguably the best class in the game. As far as melee units go, typically Swordmasters are going to be the best class that you're going to get into them. Arguably, it's a toss-up between the Dragoon and the Swordmaster. Basically, they're the male equivalent of a Valkyrie in that sense, in which they have just a whole bunch of good stuff going for them. But again, very solid all-around class. You need the Book of Initiation in order to get them to that class, but hopefully by the point that they're actually available, you've probably gotten that on a good number of people. Essentially, it just consists of dodging several attacks in a row, because, they're very dodgy. Alright, so now we get into, as per usual, a little bit of an odd duck as far as character design goes, and we get to the original PSP remake. Alright, so here's the thing. At this point, they decided that they no longer got access to Western swords whatsoever. They only had one weapon available to them, which was the two-handed katana. And on top of that, they actually had some pretty subpar stats overall. So you might be saying, okay, how are they going to keep up with that? Well, they had a few abilities available to them, only one of which was actually ever useful. So starting off, let's start with their casting ability, which were war dances. So these war dances are typically a 9-tile or a 4-tile area of effect around them, essentially usually being a debuff. So they had, for example, they had a strengthen buff, they had a weaken debuff. Typically it was stuff like that. So they had Demon Petal Dance, which was pretty useful, but a little bit hard to get. This was an area of effect charm. It's something that familiars and, well, most fairy units were just already carrying around innately, so the fact that they had to go learn it as a spell ability was a little bit of a pain. On top of that, they had Harvest Dance, which is probably one of the most useless heals in the game. Essentially, it heals half as much as a normal heal would. It ends up costing an item to even use. So these War Dances did cost consumables. There was really little reason to use them over just buying a spell book for about the same cost. So again, not fantastic. There were a few outliers in there, like I believe there was a mass stun in there, but even still, you're better off just using spellbooks and saving the skill slot. They had Mighty Strike, which essentially boosted their attack score by 25%. Now, I should note that unlike the Berserker, this boosted their base attack score. This didn't boost their weapon attack. This boosted their strength. This just boosted only their main attack score by 25%, which was barely noticeable. It really didn't do much. It's really not worth the points. It's really not worth the extra time it takes to use it. It was just bad. Alright, next up we have Mind's Eye. Essentially allows them to avoid all attacks until the next turn. It's alright. It's just, again, high cost, comes in at 60 TP. It's a little bit of a time cost. It's the latest ability that they acquire at level 24. So you're already pretty well into mid-game / late game at that point, and there's really little reason to use it. It's just not very good. However, Preempt. This is their last ability. Preempt is amazing. So for all intents and purposes, Preempt is just basically Hamido from Final Fantasy Tactics. Andor, let's see, it was changed to First Strike, I believe, in War of the Lions. But yes, it just basically means they attack first. And if you end up combining with something like Knockback, you end up just basically having the ability to knock somebody away before they can actually even hit you. So that is incredibly useful. That ability essentially allows them to potentially be a pretty effective frontline evasive tank. But even then, they're still extraordinarily weak against arrows. They're still extraordinarily weak against casters. So if you know that you're fighting a lot of dedicated melee units, they might be something worth using. Like for example, one very fun use of them is when you're having the one-on-one fights with either Vice or Lenar, and yeah, essentially you just have Denim run in as a Swordmaster and just pretty much go and have the entire fight without ever getting hit. So that's a pretty fun way to do it. But again, it's kind of subpar as far as the remake goes. And now, as per usual, we get to the best one. So now we get to the One Vision variant. So let's go ahead and take a quick look over here. So alright, what's changed? Well, first of all, I'd like to happily announce that they basically got all of their abilities from previous games. As in, they finally got the ability to use Western swords again, and on top of that, they just specialize in swords, not specifically two-handed katanas. It's one of 4 categories of swords, not all the swords, so they now get access to all the swords. So first off, war dances became Art of War. They still get their war dances. This is just a combined list of a lot of different abilities. As far as swords go, one-handed swords, two-handed swords, one-handed katanas, two-handed katanas. Yes, they're the same word in different languages. Who gives a flying crap? You got your usual racial abilities over here. You got your usual augments. You have parry, deflect, and overpower. As with just about everyone, you get counter 3 and bash 3, so you get the full extent of counter and bash. So you can guarantee knockback on a counter, or rather on a preempt. So bash 3 plus preempt is amazing. Basically, counter's just there in case you don't end up having a preempt up that turn. You've got your usual wards. You've got jump 2, so they can get to some pretty high elevations, jumping up 6 tiles. You've got wade for getting through water. You've got steadfast if you want them to hold an area. You've got double attack for using double swords. So yeah, 2 swords, 2 katanas, 1 in each hand. 1 katana, 1 sword, I should say. Up to you. There's all kinds of nice combos you can do with that. Siege allows them to be an effective flanker. Field Alchemy 1, so they get access to basic healing items. Max TP plus 4. This is fantastic for the basic two-handers, or the Western two-handers, I should say. For example, even the starting kill move with a two-hander will absolutely just rock faces with TP4. So that's pretty great. Treasure Hunt, again, this is going to become more of a thing later. Tactician 2, pretty much necessary on them. There are exceptions. If you're running a dual wield build, Tactician isn't nearly as necessary, but very, very handy for a preempt build. You probably want to keep that running at all times. Double Reflect, they have relatively low defenses, so Double Reflect is a pretty good one. Challenge, now here's the thing. They got a second part to their preempt. So preempt allows them to attack before the other guy attacks, right? And then over here they have challenge. So what essentially gets created here is, say they put up a challenge, they run up, and they're like 3 tiles from another guy, right? They can't attack, but then they can use their main turn to put out a challenge. They can use their action move to put out a preempt. This will mean that that guy will be far more likely to prioritize attacking them. So challenge essentially just says, okay, any enemies nearby, come at me. That's pretty much all this move does. And so what'll happen, they'll go ahead and charge at them like basically every movie ever made and get the friggin' Christ countered out of them, and it's amazing. This combo is beautiful. So this does still make them a target for arrows, but bear in mind, as soon as they get hit, it goes away. So if you get a melee unit to attack, counter them, great. If you end up getting a second one to do it, great. Since preempt does not wear off, it lasts until the next turn, you can potentially get a whole group of enemies attacking at once using this. If they get hit with an arrow, though, it will essentially go away, which is fine. I mean, this just puts a target on their head. If arrows are becoming a problem, you probably want them to take a step back. Blade Focus, this gives them Stunbringer, and then Steel Stance, this increases defense. This used to be a ninja ability. They absolutely did not need this ability. So Steel Stance is a lot better for dual-wielding builds, as it allows them to essentially withstand hits and counter, as well as go and double attack later. You can do the usual preempt push-away build with them, but by and large I find that I prefer steel stance on a dual-wielding build. So alright, let's take a look at what kind of stuff they have here. So, two-handed swords, as I mentioned before. They get access to all medium armors, pretty much across the board. All accessories, though I don't believe those are ever locked anyway. And alright, so let's look at these different builds here, since there was actually a pretty wide variant of them this time. So this is the pretty standard accuracy type setup that I like to use. So pretty much mail armor, so medium armor. For evasion, defense, and health, we've got the Crucible Saleh here. For agility, basically, when it comes to your end game standard helmets, here's what we have. So we've got the Damask Helm, we've got the Crucible Saleh, and if they're able to use heavy armor, Worm Scale. So that would not apply in this case. So they get access to the medium variants. So the regular Damask Helm, which is, funnily enough, closer to us. Well, it does matter. The regular Damask Helm here will essentially give you 12 for agility, 20 for health, 14 for defense. The Crucible Saleh essentially takes away the health bonus and gives you agility and mind. Now, this can really go either way, but as far as these guys go, probably the standard helm is better. The Salet would be better for caster type build, but either way, there it is. Moving on to the next one here, we have a sort of more crit-based build. This one, if we go look at their skills here. Oh, hell. I did not mean to do that. There we go. Thank you, quick saves. So, alright, let's take another quick look at this here. So if we go ahead and assign them here, so TP4, this guy is intentionally designed to have worse defense. I still want him to have some defense, so I don't want him to have the super high health. This may seem like a strange thing, but I don't want him to have the health bonus from the regular helmet, just because the lower their health, the more likely they are to be prioritized for healing, and since this party heals a lot, I want this guy to be healed up near constantly. So, right here, Nomad Gloves for getting more crits, Saleh for just general defense, and the Terminus Est for just being a pretty general sword at this part of the game. But yeah, I want him to build up all the way to the maximum for TP4 and then start using kill moves. That's his whole shtick here. So if all's built correctly, they should usually be able to use preempt constantly and still build up their bar very effectively. So that's all well and good there. If we move on to the next one, I apologize, I have skipped out of the menu for some reason. Such things will happen. But yes, there's a lot more builds to go though. So over here we have what is basically the guts build. So we've got the Dragon Slayer, and yes, it is supposed to be that Dragon Slayer. So as you see here, the side-graded variants, which this is one of, although I believe this one's actually just found like this, it's just considered part of the side grade category, they actually lower your accuracy by 32%, or by just 32 in general, as opposed to raising it like the swords usually do. So like if we go over here, you see the Terminus Est raises it by 34, whereas the Dragon Slayer lowers it by 32. However, its power is significantly higher. We're talking about a 70 power difference between the two. So this is actually the strongest two-hander in the game. I believe second only to the Ogre Blade. Actually, I believe by itself it's the strongest. If you got the Ogre Blade, I believe it's... yeah, so by itself it's the strongest, but other combinations can be stronger. So, anyhow, strongest single weapon right there. Actually available pretty early on, I have to say, at 32 here. So down here we have basic helmet for defense, as well as giving a parry bonus. We've got the Phantom Cloak, which increases agility. Bear in mind, both of these were picked for the purpose of increasing agility. So this completely counters the agility penalty from the sword, as well as giving a little bit of extra defense. And then right here, a skill earring. So this guy's whole shtick is, again, just power. So he is a more extreme variant for this one. That's why I said this one, a little bit basic. This one's here just to kind of show the contrast between the two of just how different they can be. Alright. Moving on to more actually interesting ones, so you can go for an elemental build with these guys. Like we've got the Time and Tide right here, basically a sword katana. These guys are the two-handed katana variants. We've got the Whisker Coat for the hell of it, the Tidal Waders just because they look stylish and they give some avoidance. Then the Cataract Choker, so she will constantly be building up her augments here. You basically get I believe it's 5% extra damage per augment rank. So yeah, it's a good bit of damage buildup over time. Very worthwhile to do that. Over here we've got a pretty basic speed build. Actually, as you may notice, their defense is a little bit lacking, but their entire thing is that they're supposed to be far faster than the others. Essentially, just heal themselves faster, pull out all of their heal moves faster. As far as their magic abilities go, I'll get into those in just a little bit here, but they're far more effective at actually area healing now. Like it's a real heal. It's not this 20 health crap anymore. So it's actually good. And then over here we have a slightly more armored, slightly more finesse-based variant. Nothing too fancy here. This guy. This is hands down my absolute friggin' favorite build for the Swordmaster. So, first off, yes, I did break my usual rule here of having a cap at level 30 for the sake of having two Crisagrims. So, if you didn't know, the Crisagrim is actually a Symphony of the Night reference. You could get a sword that essentially hit, I think it was like 100 times or something. You basically just covered part of the sword screen and just sword slashes. It was pretty great. So it's actually a unique thing in that it actually hits the same way as a spear, as well as hits twice per each hit. So even though each one is individually pretty darn weak, like you may notice this is about a third of the power of the Dragon Slayer, uh, this essentially does 4 hits. On top of that, if they counter with it, it essentially, combined with Bash, allows them to push the guy back, plus still hit 2 times. Plus, then somebody else comes in, they get hit, then you can counter, and then you hit both of those guys. Then their turn comes up, and then you can hit each of those guys 4 times. It's amazingly good. And on top of that, if we give them the Nomad Gloves, it gives them a crit, so that's pretty fantastic right there. Phantom Cloak just so they don't miss, and so that they're prioritized because of their low defense. Champion's Earring for the sake of giving them just that little bit of extra power and accuracy. Yeah, hands down, this is my favorite build. I love it so friggin' much. Over here we've got a tankier variant of the two sword type of build. Basically just meant to outlast everybody else. They don't get targeted very often, so they're usually able to run around doing damage with impunity. I should mention that only applies in the context of this team. They're even with all of this extra defense, they are still pretty medium as far as defense goes, but they still might not be targeted as often. Over here we have Lloyd showing off the kind of evasion long range type setup. So this guy is meant for having as long of a movement range as possible. Basically, the scout vests and scout leggings give him +1 move and +1 jump. Uh, Also, they give pretty decent avoidance bonuses. On top of that, they get a seal of evasion. He has a Legion Waster, which come to think of it, why does he have a Legion Waster? Is that actually classed as a... Okay, it does get classed as a one-handed sword now, which it always was a one-handed sword. This is considered one of the one-handed side grades, as it were. So the long swords, essentially, they're a one-handed sword with a, with some extra power on top of them, extra agility on top of them. They're basically a one-handed sword using 2 hands. It's great. So this is kind of like a good midway point if you only have access to one-handed swords, and you want them to have a little bit more oomph. Over here we have a bit more of a vigor type setup. Again, just a different variant on the tank from before. And then over here we have one of the... I believe this is the highest you can actually get your crit to go. So this was a cool thing I was playing with around the other day, but you can get their crit rate absurdly high. So we have the Goddess Scorned here. You get 50 luck off of that. You get the Nomad Gloves for another 16. Alluring Dress just because, okay, if they're going for a crit build, they might as well look nice while doing it. And then we got the Seal of Fortune here for another 40. So overall, that is 106 extra luck, which I believe almost guarantees a crit with every hit. So there's that. Then we've got this one just for the sake of showing off what other kind of stuff they can equip. And alright, so we might as well let them go ahead and fight it out here. So we'll just go ahead and let this run while discussing the class a little bit. No, wait, we did go over their abilities. So, like I said before, the ability to actually give another little step on top of preempt makes these guys a lot more viable for what they do. The problem with their original variant was, again, just because they had so many weaknesses. They had a pretty intense strength as far as their melee ability to just, completely negate damage at close range. But again, they had a whole lot of weaknesses now. So, with the kind of stuff that's available to them, um, this is probably a good time to talk about their weapon options. So first of all, you're having a problem with arrows, like close range, they can just cancel out the damage entirely. If you're having a problem with arrows, a lot of the katanas actually have deflect bonuses off them. So, for example, even though one-handed parrying katanas, which are the ones that lower crit, so the side-graded ones, give you a parry bonus, the two-handed katanas will actually give you a deflect bonus. So you can essentially just take that, have a little bit of extra bonus damage going, well, bit of bonus defense going on from that. You can give them some rings to counter let's say you give them the Seal of Resistance there, you give them some Crucible Greaves, you give them some good armor and everything else. You can even make them pretty reasonably resistant to casters. So ultimately, they can have some pretty well-rounded defense. You can pretty much tailor them to almost any situation. Just about the only thing that they actually don't have any options for are a shield. So their preemptability is, for all intents and purposes, their shield. So here we go. This right here. So look, even though he got pushed back and everything else, he still managed to get that second hit in. That's why I love using double Chrysagrams. Unfortunately, it seems like they're getting a whole lot of good crits here, despite the fact, like, earlier on there, the actual odds of hitting were pretty low. I actually didn't cover their casting abilities now that I think about it, so let's go ahead and give that a little bit of a peek. Because, yes, those actually got made good now. So, yeah, their actual war dances no longer suck. So, right here, Lion Dance, this used to just give Strengthen, now it gives Strengthen and Dodge. Pixie Dance, you get True Strike and Resilient. You get Harvest Dance. This one actually, I believe, does around 40 to 60. It used to do 20. Liberty Dance, it removes a debuff from everybody in the area. So it's just one debuff, but still, it's a wide area removal type ability. You get Tremor Dance here for a mass stun. You get this Lingering Dance here for slow. You get this, which lowers TP of enemies and doubles the user's TP reserves. So it essentially allows them to boost their own bar while going and shutting down a bunch of other characters. Demon Petal, still amazing for Charm. However, its area has been lowered because they can be really, really good with it. Actually, Demon Petal Dance on, I think it was on... No. I was going to say I think I used it on a Songstress. No, wait, I did use it on a Songstress. It's actually really strong on a Songstress. That's what it was. I thought it might have been another ability for a second there, but no, it was Demon Petal Dance. So that ability can be really strong at this point. Essentially, you could have a unit go in and just shut down an entire party for an extended period of time using it. It's extremely strong. So yeah, these guys are very good overall now. As you can see, they're having no problems dishing out damage. They're having a pretty okay time actually surviving all these hits. They end up taking a fair whack higher damage than almost everybody else, but due to the fact that they've got a pretty effective AoE heal, they've got some pretty effective moves in general, they're going to do pretty darn well. And I haven't even mentioned the fact that there's yet another Knight of Lodis reference in these guys, and that their ranged ability actually gives a stun. So their thrown rock, their rock that they throw around, does have the ability to stun. So they even have that as an option available to them. So you may notice in a lot of cases where they're countering at long range, they may potentially get a stun off with that thing. Very, very, very handy. So it's nice to have. I mean, it's a combination of two different references, since they no longer have Swallow's Daze, which is that old katana ability. Actually, come to think of it, I never even checked if perhaps Rakes put that in the kill move list. So by the end of this fight, we're going to find that out. But yeah, so their Throne Rock, handy little stun move. They've still got very high evasion on top of everything else. You can build them for extraordinarily high evasion, like a phantom cloak, some leggings. Seal of evasion, they can end up with around like 270, 280-ish as far as their evasion score goes. Not that they even need it in a lot of cases if they have preempt running, but still. It allows them to avoid arrows. It still allows them to, I believe it allows them to avoid some debuffs. But they're very, very strong. As you can see here, already got 2 enemies charmed on their side. They're having no problem overpowering them anyway. That guy doesn't know what he's doing because he just took out his own friend here. But, oh well. Such is life, such is life. And there we go. The preempt Crusaegrim is just amazing. Oh, I thought we were going to get a double there for a second. And there we are. There's that, the double Crusaegrim absolutely rocking face over here. It's so dang strong. I mean, there's a very good reason you have to go all the way to the bottom of the Palace of the Dead to get one. But basically, once you get the Book of the Master there, you're able to just go and make however friggin' many of those things you want. I had one run recently where I went and I just had 2 Swordmasters defending the flanks with dual Crusaegrims, and it was amazing. Oh, it was great. Absolutely fantastic. Oh, by the way, as you may have noticed there, it was showing his counter score. You may have noticed he was about to do 60 damage with a frickin' rock. Like, they do a fair whack of damage with these rocks. So, just something that's out there. Interestingly enough, if you actually don't give them a weapon, I believe Swordmasters are one of the ones that end up getting one of the upgraded punches. So yeah, One Vision also included several different variants on melee and thrown abilities, as you may know. And yeah, upgraded punches are one of those. So they all end up scaling in different ways, but I believe the ranged ones are far more interesting for the most part. I haven't tested out all the punching abilities, but it would be interesting to try an entirely unarmed run at some point. But I believe the first option, or rather the first... Oh, by the way, right here, Harvest Dance. So I was actually incorrect in my numbers earlier. They're doing 100 for heals. So yeah, it's not 60 to 80, it is 100. So absolutely amazing for area heals. They're not exactly as good as something like a Cleric would be in that situation, but still. They're going and they're getting a pretty impressive heal off on everybody. Yeah, that's a very effective use of the Rending Gale, their AI. Let's just waste that second hit entirely. And there we go, she's one of the double hit variants. You may be noticing one thing that I have not brought up to this point, which is the secondary effects on all these weapons. So, you may be wondering, with the numbers that you've seen so far, why you would end up going for katanas over Western swords. This isn't the old longsword versus katana argument. No, we're not getting into all that whole debacle. But I mean, sword to sword. It's a sharp piece of metal. Dang it! Everyone tried what they could. So, okay. Western swords are more about agility, and so they'll give you a slight agility bonus, and they'll end up giving you misstep on your hits. So essentially, if you end up hitting, a lot of the time it'll end up inflicting misstep, leaving them open for follow-up hits. However, on the katana end, you may be noticing they're getting a little bit of extra damage off the end of their move. You may be noticing that's not damage. That's actually them cutting into the TP bar. So even though their overall damage is lower, they are essentially usually getting a crit bonus, and on top of that, they're actually cutting into the TP bar. So they're a little bit of a trickier weapon to use, but could potentially be absolutely devastating under the right circumstances. Alright, there we go. This guy over here just smacking this fully armed lizard guy down with a friggin' piece of wood. By the way, if you ever missed it, the Legion set is literally just like an old practice set. That's its whole deal. Like, a bunch of people practiced with it, and it stinks real bad. That's why nobody wants to approach when you're wearing it. It's what used to be called the Stinky set. It's weird because they didn't give any indicator that those things were supposed to go together. Like, I think it was something like a glistening helm, which doesn't tell you that it stinks whatsoever until you wait for the entire description to go through. You had... I think it was Reeking Armor, something like that, and then you had the Legion Waster. And none of that made sense. So now it's the Legion set. It's just Legion Armor, Legion Helmet, Legion Waster. Makes more sense that way. You've got the Legion Arm Guards as well. I forgot to mention that. I think those used to be called the Muskie Gauntlets or something like that. So at least you can tell they're part of a set now. Thank you, Rakes, for that consistency. So yeah, you can tell they're part of a set now. Interestingly enough, despite the fact that they're a sword practicing set, the Legion Waster itself, or rather the Legion set, cannot be equipped by the Swordmaster. So I believe, let's see, the Warrior can equip them, I believe Dragoons can equip them, and I believe Terror Knights can equip the full set. Or actually, no. I need to check. I don't think they can equip the helmet. They can equip the helmet, they can equip the armor. I'm not sure about the gauntlets. But either way, they can't equip the set. So anybody that has access to heavy armor as well as one-handed swords would be, or one-handed swords would be able to use it. And alright, actually no, then I am very well corrected yet again. It would actually not be Terror Knights that gain access to them, it would be regular Knights. My apologies on that. Alright, so let's take a quick peek here. Or actually no, we're going to take a quick peek once they're done at the kill moves, just to see what they ended up getting out of this. As you see here, these guys are actually even holding up better than the Knights did in this particular fight. The Knights still would have ended up winning, and by the way, if you're curious, I can do an entire series just off of seeing these different classes go through and go through randomized reason way fights, just to kind of see how they perform in general. Obviously, this would be based off the AI. If a player were playing these, they probably would play a lot more defensively. But this is just to show off what the class can do without an intelligent mind behind them. I should point out, I don't believe they've used challenge more than once so far. The AI usually isn't going to be using those particular moves, but either way, they're there for the player. Alright, there we go. Yeah, Harvest Dance is doing a pretty good job taking what little wounds these guys have gotten and keeping them relatively minimal. In this particular party, there are 5 of the 12 units that actually have access to Harvest Dance, so they're not all going to be mass healing all the time, they're not going to be mass stunning all the time. This is mostly for the sake of making sure that the AI doesn't do what it usually likes to do, where it runs around throwing around buffs or debuffs all the time. So, keep it a little bit more interesting. And alright, I think I've just about covered everything I wanted to cover on these guys. We've covered all the weapon types, we've covered the skill types, we've covered their pretty wide range of armor options. And yeah, they're doing a pretty fantastic job just completely rocking these guys here, as you can tell. So, alright. Yeah, you know what? I think we'll just wait a little longer to see how far their kill moves have gotten so that we can see whether or not Swallow's Daze is one of the moves that they have. Actually, I believe it was renamed to something completely different. But we'll find out soon now, won't we? Interestingly enough, by the way, if you were never aware, their first move, the very first two-handed katana kill move, is actually intentionally a reference to the old Let Us Cling Together, due to the fact that it petrifies upon use. So yeah, that's a reference to the fact that Swordmasters used to be preposterously good at petrifying units of all things. So alright, let's look at the kill move. So Nightblade, no, that's not the one I'm looking for. Where are we here? Yeah, Mistfiner. Okay, that's okay, that actually has changed then. So Mistfiner is the first two-handed katana move. It's essentially a double hit now. The petrification move, I believe, got moved up to a later point. But anyhow, let's go ahead and move on here. Let's return to the fight. I don't believe there's really anything else to cover here. These guys have a wide range of options available. Easily one of the stronger ones that you want to have defending the flanks. Obviously, you're going to have somebody like a knight backing them up, since if they end up getting attacked from the wrong sides, if they don't have their preempt up, they're going to take a crap load of damage. But either way, very, very strong. As you can see here, that one guy with the relatively tanky setup and the 2 basic swords, he's actually just gone ahead and made it all the way to the other side without really even taking much damage. Was able to get all the way to their healer without much of a problem. So, very relatively effective tanking going on from him. And all right, so there we go. Anyhow, I hope this was informative. I hope this was interesting, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.